There are times when I'm playing Star Citizen and I see things like, this computer menu. And I think that it is like an inspired design choice. It's kind of a throwback menu to a bygone era of PC gaming. I like it. I like the style of it, and I feel that when I see things like this, I feel that CIG is on the right track. And even like I know that there are certain menus that have been controversial, like when you go to Grim Hex. I know that there are people who looked at this trade menu and just were like, "Oh my god, that's so ugly." But for me, like I looked at it and I said, "That's such a throwback to 80s, 90s DOS gaming. It's an inspired design choice. It's something that's going to resonate with a certain group of players, and they're going to look at it and go like, "Oh my god, that's so great. I love that." And the fact that it says Trial Software expired on top, brilliant. Absolutely a brilliant design choice. And I think that when you see things like that and when you're interacting with these different systems, CIG definitely is on the right track, at least in my opinion. Visually, I think that it's beautiful. But when you move on to things like the personal inventory system, like when you're mining and stuff like that, and holding down this key and opening it up, and here's how everything's designed, and it's all on a wheel. I wish I had footage of it right now, but I don't. I feel that in a weird way, CIG is kind of putting the cart before the horse with that system. And I think that in a weird way, in as much as these menus are kind of like a throwback to a bygone era of PC gaming, I think that in terms of personal inventory, I think the older games kind of do a better job. Now, any MMO that you play, you hit B for bag or I for inventory, whatever, and it opens up a box or a series of boxes depending on how they do the personal inventory system. Like, I've got a military vest and it fits X amount of cargo. I've got a backpack, it fits this. Or, you're a character in a fantasy MMO and it's like you got 3 or 4 bags and here's everything that you have in your bags, and everything has a little icon, and maybe at the bottom there's a little line that says, and this is the amount of gold or money that you have. Those systems might seem rather basic and rather boring, but they're entirely functionally brilliant. Everything has a little icon you can drag and drop, and you think about it. You want to trade with another player. You open up a trade interaction with that player, whatever means that you use in that game to do it. A window opens up. There's generally 2 big boxes and 2 little boxes. The big boxes are where you drop the icons of, objects that you want to trade, or the little boxes are where you enter a sum of gold or dollars or, credits or whatever that you want to trade for that object. It's a very basic thing, but it entirely works. And I think that CIG should kind of revisit this design aesthetic in those terms and just come up with a basic trade window that facilitates trade between players. I think that was maybe even one of the roadblocks that ended up kicking back, hacking CrimeStat for other players. I think that was probably one of the things, is they were saying like, oh man, but now we have to create a whole new UI that facilitates trade. And well, we got to take it to the UX guys, and then no, and we're already designing a whole new UI, so how do we implement it? And it's just not worth doing, so we'll revisit it later. Even if the basic trade UI between players was just 4 boxes and an accept button that just floated in the air in front of you, I would be fine with that, so long as we understood that it was just a temporary thing until you kind of stepped into the future when you could polish things. To a certain degree, I'm afraid that CIG, by kind of committing so much to the visual aesthetic and the design, certainly with the personal inventory system, is that we're not really sure what the limitations of that system are and how well they're going to work with other systems. That's where I kind of feel that the cart is going before the horse. We should have a basic ass box that just allows us to trade in between players, and then once we understand the limitations of that interaction, the needs and the requirements of that interaction, then we can go and take the time to really design an inspired UI for that experience. But I think that a basic UI would be much better. I mean, certainly it would allow us to facilitate player trade. It would allow us to, open up these interactions and to see what these interactions really entail and how we can improve it. And it would also open up avenues of gameplay that right now are gated behind the idea of waiting for this whole brand new UI to come in that we've been waiting for, frankly, for years. And, I would argue that has probably, to a certain degree, stunted or certainly slowed down a lot of the players and the game's development, because we're always waiting on this new UI, the new UI that's going to do everything. Whereas I think that we should just kind of come in with a bargain basement, just quick patch it together, put it in UI, and then as we explore these interactions and what those interactions require, then we can kind of add to it what we need very quickly. And then once we have the complete package and we understand the limitations, what we want it to achieve, what we don't want it to achieve, then we can, step up and say, okay, now we can do a whole fancy UI with this. I think that, we're kind of, it's kind of like when you build a starship and then you realize, like, whoops, can't really see out of the cockpit, and now I got to angle, like if you've flown the Defender, right, you'll know that, I had certain things to say about the Defender. If you get into that ship right now and you fly it and you look at it from the side and you notice how the prongs that stick out of the ship have a very noticeable slope forward, that they actually slope downwards to pull them out of the pilot's view. When you notice that, you go like, oh yeah, they had to make a pretty big change, or not really a big change, but a pretty significant change to that ship, because they kind of put the cart before the horse and they designed the ship without really understanding what the limitations that was placing on the pilot. And then they had to kind of, at least they stepped up and they said, yeah, no, we see it now, and they fixed it. But arguably being, acknowledging what those limitations are in the first place, and or at least being aware of them, would allow you to prevent making that mistake in the first place. So in a way, I'm kind of, when we're looking at UI, I think that we're kind of getting a little ahead of ourselves here by trying to make all these new and interactive menus and all this stuff like that, when at this stage in the game's development, arguably we don't even really need that. We can have just basic, like the Grim Hex trade menu. We can have these very, very basic things. It can almost be entirely text-based with little drop-down menus that just basically make it work so we can start exploring this thing. And then once we know what it needs, then we can really polish it up. It's kind of like, you're polishing and waxing a car that you haven't even put the engine or the tires on. You know what I mean? It's just like, you're not there yet. Slow down. It's just, to me, like, that was one of the things, because originally, like, when I started thinking about this video, and I wanted to make a video where we were talking about the upcoming prison system. I was saying that the counterbalance to that, after you're done with the prison system, you should really step up and do hacking, and hacking for other players. And I was, once again, I was going to go back to the idea of the Herald, and maybe the Herald could fly around one of the one of the communication satellites, and it could, draw off, comms information, and it could, once it acquires a certain amount, it can then go, okay, I have enough data here to make a key that people can use to hack their crime stat. And you could facilitate that. But as I was kind of exploring that idea and thinking about it, I was like, well, then you need a UI for this. You need a UI for that. And they're already doing this whole, magnificent, amazing new UI that we keep hearing about but never see. And I was just thinking that, there's so much that we could do, even with the limited interactions and the limited facilities that we have, if only we had the UI for it. But we're constantly stunted in our development by the lack of that UI in other areas. And I feel that right now we're paying way too much of a time tax to get that UI, into the game. Now, there are areas of the user interface that I would argue are a priority. Certainly the HUD and the recent changes that we finally got to the HUD, but obviously not the full and complete changes that we're going to get. I mean, if you have a Gladius and you get behind the stick of a Gladius, you'll see a much improved user interface when you're flying that ship, with certain features that just the other ships don't really have right now, and probably reflective of its status in Squadron 42. It's just that, while there are certain areas of UI that are obviously going to be a priority, I mean, it is like a space game, so spaceships and their HUDs should obviously be a priority. I feel that in other areas, constantly waiting for the new and the fancy and the amazing UI has really just stunted the player experience unnecessarily, I would argue, because I think that, much like certain problems with certain ships over the years, it's going to be something that CIG is now going to have to pay a tax on later and go, oh no, now we made this whole thing, it's really amazing, but crap, now we got to go back and rework it because we never took into account this, we never thought about that. And I think that just creating a basic thing allows you to explore all those ideas and all those limitations and then create the much more fancy, polished up thing. But getting too hung up on the idea that Star Citizen is a live game and everything has to be bespoke and fancy and it has to change the world and every interaction needs to be like a whole new thing that everyone goes like, oh, wow, look at that and look at this. By using like these old style basic interaction menus that CIG did in the very beginning, I think that in a way, visually, yeah, it was an inspired choice, but I think that from a design point of view, it was also pretty inspired in that it's the basic interactions that we need more than anything else. And, all the fancy bells and whistles can kind of come along later. We don't really need to commit to these things right now. We can just provide the basic interaction and then polish it later, which is kind of the way you're supposed to be doing it in game development, right? You're supposed to facilitate the gameplay, test it, and then go like, okay, here's the adjustments and here's the stage where we come in and polish things. And we're not there yet. We're putting the cart before the horse. UI is always going to be, it's going to be a key element of every video game that you play. It's what governs how you interact with other players, or it's what governs how you interact with the world, right? It's such a key and important thing. And obviously CIG wants to put something out there that, is going to satisfy not only players' aesthetic needs, hopefully, but their basic functionality needs. And I think that we really are at a stage where it's more important to address functionality than it is to address polish. At least that's my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Anyways, hopefully hacking, after prisons also, can we do that? Hope you guys enjoyed the show, and thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.